Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're really digging into the worldview of a pretty controversial figure, Dr. Bryan Ardis, to understand the claims he makes, starting with his core belief about the entire pharmaceutical industry.
Okay, so everything really kicks off with this one huge, provocative claim. This is the foundation for his entire worldview, the starting point for everything he's going to argue about modern health, about history, and yes, about the recent pandemic.
So how does he actually build this case? Well, we're going to follow his argument through these 5 key themes. We'll start with his take on medical history and see how it all spirals into his theories on COVID-19 and nicotine.
All right, first up, let's talk about the historical foundation of his whole argument. He basically claims that having a deep-seated distrust of the modern medical establishment isn't just justified, he'd say it's essential. Now, what's so interesting here is how this slide visually frames his argument. On one hand, you've got thousands of years of natural medicine, like acupuncture, and on the other, you have this modern synthetic drug model that he traces back to a single report in 1910. And then he points out this pattern. A natural remedy gets banned, and almost immediately after, a synthetic version gets approved.
And he really zeroes in on this one document, the Flexner Report. His sources claim this was the pivot point, the moment that natural approaches like nutrition and herbal medicine were systematically stripped from medical schools to make way for a new, highly profitable model based on drugs derived from petroleum.
Okay, so that historical claim, that's the lens through which he looks at the COVID-19 pandemic. And this is where we get into what's probably his most famous and definitely most controversial theory.
So here's the absolute linchpin of his theory, this comparison. He points to a study from French researchers back in April 2020, and he claims they found that the COVID-19 spike proteins are literally identical to 2 specific neurotoxins, that's toxins that attack your nervous system, found in king cobra and crate snake venom.
And that leads to the central question of his whole COVID theory. Since his source material claims these venoms target what are called nicotine receptors, think of them as docking stations on our nerve cells, he asks this really provocative question. If smokers already have nicotine taking up those spots, could it physically block his so-called venom from attaching, and in effect, make them immune? So, if COVID symptoms are actually from a venom-like protein, then according to Ardis, the antidote hasn't just been ignored, it's been actively suppressed and demonized.
And, look at this list he presents. It's startlingly long. He argues that old medical texts actually called tobacco the panacea of all panaceas, basically a cure-all. And he says that's precisely why it had to be discredited.
Now, to back up these really big claims, his material points to a very specific case study from 2023. This one looked at patients who were struggling with some really debilitating long COVID symptoms, and they just weren't getting any relief from conventional treatments. And get this, these folks had been suffering for 2 full years.
So, what did the study ask them to do? Just one thing: wear a small 7-milligram nicotine patch every day for only 6 days.
And the result he cites? A full 100% remission of all their long COVID symptoms. He even adds that when they did a follow-up 6 months later, not a single one of the symptoms had come back.
Okay, but wait a minute. This obviously raises a massive question, right? What about addiction? Isn't nicotine supposed to be one of the most addictive substances on the planet? Well, Ardis takes this idea head-on.
He argues that we've all been fundamentally misled about that. His sources claim that nicotine, by itself, is not addictive. Instead, he points the finger at these man-made chemicals called pyrazines, which he says tobacco companies started adding to cigarettes in the 1970s specifically to make them addictive. So the key takeaway here is the distinction he's making between pure nicotine and what's in commercial tobacco. He's basically saying our entire understanding of nicotine addiction is totally flawed because we've only ever really studied it when it's mixed with these other highly addictive chemicals. So, wrapping this all together, this whole worldview where nicotine is a suppressed, non-addictive cure, Ardis then gives his audience very specific instructions on how he believes it should be used for health and prevention.
He lays out 2 different protocols in his materials. First, there's a preventative one, a very low-dose daily regimen. And then there's a second, higher-dose, short-term protocol that he says is for people suffering from long COVID, or what he calls vaccine-related injuries.
So where does that leave us? What are we supposed to make of all this? Dr. Ardis weaves together a narrative of historical grievance with a really radical reinterpretation of the pandemic, all to position this demonized substance as a kind of secret cure. It's a worldview that truly challenges the very foundations of modern medicine, leaving us all with that one big question. Is this a hidden panacea, or is it a harmful narrative?